Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. हरिनाम संकीर्तन यज्ञ की जगत गुरु श्रील प्रभुपाद की ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। 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 नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरये। नष्टप्रायेषु भद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवत्युत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। So we are reading from Canto 5, Chapter 11, verse number 11. Dravya स्वभावाशय कर्म कालेर एकादशामी मनसो विकारः सहस्रश शतश कोटिशश्च क्षेत्रज्ञतो नामितो न स्वतः स्युः। द्रव्य स्वभावाशय कर्म कालेर एकादशामी मनसो विकारः सहस्रश शतशः कोटिशश्च क्षेत्रज्ञतो नामितो न स्वतः स्युः। द्रव्य स्वभावाशय कर्म काले एकादशामी मनसो विकारः सहस्रश शतशः कोटिशश्च क्षेत्रज्ञतो नामितो न स्वतः स्युः।
द्रव्य स्वभावस्य कर्म काले
द्रव्य स्वभावशय कर्म काले
एकादशामी मनसो विकारः
एकादशामी मनसो विकारः
सहस्रशः शतशः कोटिशश्च
सहस्रशः शतशः कोटिशश्च
क्षेत्रज्ञतो न मिथुनः स्वतः स्युः।
क्षेत्रज्ञतो नामितो न स्वतः स्युः।
द्रव्य स्वभावाशय कर्म काले
द्रव्य स्वभावाशय कर्म काले
एकादशामी मनसो विकारः
एकादशामी मनसो विकारः
सहस्रशः कोटिशश्च
सहस्रशः शतशः कोटिशश्च
क्षेत्रज्ञतो मितो न स्वतः स्युः।
Kshetragyato na mito na swatasyu. Dravya swabhavashya karma kale. Ekadashami manaso vikaraha. Sahasrasha shatasha kotishascha. Kshetragyato namito na swatasyu. Word-to-word meanings. Dravya, by physical objects. Swabhava, by nature, is the cause of development. Ashaya, by culture. Karma, by predestined resultant actions. Kale, by time. Ekadasha, 11. Ami, all these. Manasaha, of the mind. Vikaraha, transformations. Sahasrasha, in thousands. Shatasha, in hundreds. Kotishascha, in and millions. Kshetragyata, from the original Supreme Personality of Godhead. Na, not. Mitha, one another. Na, nor. Swatah, from themselves. Siv, are. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Jai Srila Prabhupada. The physical elements, nature, the original cause, culture and destiny, and the time element are all material causes. Agitated by these material causes, the 11 functions transform into hundreds of functions, and then into thousands, and then into millions. But all these transformations do not take place automatically by mutual combination. Rather, they are under the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Purport. One should not think that all the interactions of the physical elements, gross and subtle, that cause the transformation of the mind and consciousness are working independently. They are under the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In Bhagavad Gita 15.15, Krishna says that the Lord is situated in everyone's heart. Sarvasya chaham hridhi sannivishto matta smritir jnanam apohanam cha. As mentioned herein, Supersoul, Kshetragya, is directing everything. The living entity is also Kshetragya. But the Supreme Kshetragya is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is the witness and the order giver. Under his direction, everything takes place. The different inclinations of the living entity are created by his own nature or his expectations, and he is trained by the Supreme Personality of Godhead through the agency of material nature. The body, nature, and physical elements are under the direction of Supreme Personality of Godhead. They do not function automatically. Nature is neither independent nor automatic. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is behind nature. Maya dakshena prakriti suyate sa characharam hetu nanena kaunteya jagat viparivartate. This material nature is working under my direction, O son of Kunti, and it is producing all moving and unmoving beings. By its rule, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurve Nama Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamsha Shri Rupam Sagra Jatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha Namam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutare Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashat Deshatarine Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishna Namane Gauri Tushe Nama. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deen Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishbhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vansha Kalpataro Besha Kripa Sindhu Bevacha Patita Nam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Nama Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Girim Yat Kripatam Ham Vande Shri Guru Dinatarinam Paramananda Madhavam Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram. Hare Krishna. So today we'll be discussing this verse from the 5th canto, 11th chapter, 11th verse. And as we have already discussed the background, here the teachings are being given by Jad Bharat to Maharaj Rahugana, and he is talking about the mind. He is talking about the mind, and in the previous verses we discussed that how the mind, if uncontrolled, it's like a wild uncontrolled elephant, and it leads a person to bondage if the mind is not under control. And the same mind, if under control, same mind, if engaged in some devotional activities, then the same mind can lead a person to liberation. This is what we discussed in the previous verses. And in the just previous verse, we discussed about the nature of the mind. We discussed about these 11 functions which talks about the mind. So basically, as we are all aware, we have 5 knowledge acquiring senses. All these eyes, ears, nose, skin and tongue. And then we have the 5 working senses. Legs, hands, anus, genitals, and the speech. And above them we have something called as false ego. So these were the 11 functions of the mind that was given in the previous verse. That these 11 functions, or these are the 11 transformations of the mind. Basically how these functions act, all these senses act based on response to sense objects. When they get attracted, or when they see some sense object, when they are exposed to some sense object, then they are pulled in that direction. So these were the 11 functions of the mind. And we also know, as Bhagavad Gita says, Indriyani parani ahor, Indriyebha paramana, manasastu para buddhir, yo buddhe paratastu saha. Basically that above these senses is the mind. Above the dull matter is these senses. Above senses is the mind. Above the mind we have the intelligence, and above the intelligence we have the soul, the spirit soul. And as Prabhupada yesterday in the class was very nicely, he mentioned a word. We all know that how we have discussed in the previous verses, the jiva comes in contact with the mind, comes in proximity with the mind, starts associating with the mind. And Prabhupada uses that word power of attorney, that the soul gives the power of attorney to the mind. And that's why whatever the mind observes, or whatever the happiness, distress the mind feels, or the mixture of both, that also the soul experiences. Because the soul comes in contact or proximity with the mind. And that is why we, as we already have discussed this thing, that how we are fallen in this great ocean of the science, where there are so many sense objects around us, and we have so much strong senses. And due to that, the senses keep on attracting to these sense objects, and the mind engages in all these activities for sense gratification, and keeps on getting more and more entangled. But here we see there is one more person or one more entity involved. Now we might not remember whatever we have done in the past, whatever activities we did in the past life. Forget about past life, we might remember yesterday also how many cartons we lifted, how many rice bags we lifted, we won't remember. But then there is another entity, that is the Supreme Lord as Paramatma in each and everyone's heart. And he is the witness, he is the overseer, as it's given in this verse. He is the Upadrishta and he is the Anumanta. He is the one who is overseeing all the activities of the living entities, and he is the one who is giving the sanction for the activities. The Supreme Lord as Paramatma in the heart. So now the question comes, first of all, this question was asked before by Rahugana, and this question was also asked by Vidura to Maitreya. The question was that why have we been thrown in this ocean of nescience, or why the soul is put into this ocean of nescience. So Vidura also asked Maitreya in the 3rd canto, he asked the similar questions. He says Deshata kalato yosva avasthata swatonyata avilupta va bodhatma sa yujye tajaya katham. So he says, he talks about the Atma, the soul, that the soul is pure consciousness. The soul is Satchidananda Vigraha. Soul is not affected by all these things. Based on either any circumstance, any time, anywhere the soul is placed, it's always spiritual. But then why is the soul entangled in all this, or why the soul is thrown into this ocean of nescience, or why it gets affected by these activities? And then he also says that Bhagwan Eka Evesha Sarva Kshetreshu Avasthita. That we also know the Supreme Lord is there situated in each and everyone's heart as Paramatma. Then why does the soul goes through miseries? Why does it goes through misfortune? Why does it goes through all these things? That's what the question was asked by Vidura. He says that I am perplexed due to this. I don't understand this. Please tell me, he asked to Maitreya. And similarly, the discussion was happening here between Rahugana and Jad Bharat. And here Jad Bharat explains very nicely how this happens. How there is the glass. Yeah. How there is this glass of Maya, how this Maya makes us wear a glass. Every living entity wears this glass, where we do not see the connection of anything in the relation with the Supreme Lord. So basically we know we were part and parcels of the Supreme Lord. We are meant to render service to the Supreme Lord. But then when we enjoy it, when we desire to enjoy separately from the Supreme Lord, the Maya makes us wear this glass. And this special glass, kind of glass, where we see every object, but we don't see its relationship with Krishna. Rather, we see how we can enjoy the object for ourselves. Anything we see only how we can enjoy our senses with it. And someone may say, why Maya makes us wear this glass? Because that was our desire. We wanted to enjoy in this world, and if we were able to see the connection of everything with Krishna, we wouldn't be able to enjoy. That's why this nice glass Maya makes us wear, so that we see everything, enjoy everything, which actually belongs to the Lord without any guilt. Just like we have so many shops, guilt-free cakes, guilt-free snacks, similarly guilt-free enjoyment, and that's what Maya makes us does. So this is why in the yesterday's class also Prabhupada was talking about two things about avidya and vidya. That there may be many people who may be seemingly very learned, and in material world they may be considered great men. But then whatever knowledge they have, that's not the actual knowledge. That's actually avidya. Actual vidya or actual understanding is the Brahma Vidya or Brahma Jigyasa. Understanding about the absolute truth. And he talks about how a person can get that knowledge when he's trained up nicely as a Brahmana. He was talking about different qualities, Shamu, Damu, Titikshva, and all those qualities. That how getting those qualities and understanding all those aspects of the absolute truth, that is actual knowledge. And rest, whatever we do, whatever we are being taught, technology, science, and all those things, they are all avidya, they are all nescience. They are all useless, futile, because they don't help us getting out of this world. A similar verse comes in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which says, Vishnu Shakti para prokta kshetra gyakya tata para avidya karma samgyanya tritiya shaktir ishyati. Basically, this verse talks about the three energies of the Supreme Lord Vishnu. First of all, it talks about the internal energy, the spiritual energy of the Supreme Lord, the internal potency of the Supreme Lord. Vishnu Shakti Paraprokta. Then it talks about the second energy, that is Kshetra Gyakya Tatha Para. What is this? The Kshetra Gya, or the living entities that are there. And that is also a spiritual energy, but marginal, it tends to be covered. And the third energy, Tritiya Shaktir, is this energy of the material energy, it's also called the energy which covers the living entities and makes them do all the activities they do in this material world for some fruitive results. Avidya Karma Samgyanya. Basically, this energy covers the living entity with nescience and makes it works hard and hard for some fruitive results, for some activities, for some basically meager results of this world. And now we see in the present moment, whatever education we are getting, whatever people are being trained up, this all comes under this category, the karma sangya, that working hard for some fruitive results with no actual gain, all futile. And because people don't understand all this, because the only goal of people in this age is just to enjoy their senses, how we can enjoy nicely, so they don't understand that this is all avidya, this is not useful. So now in this verse, coming to this shloka, it talks about the vikaraha. Manaso Vikara, the transformations of the mind. And it speaks about variations in 5 aspects. So we discussed about the 11 functions of the mind based on the 5 senses, the knowledge acquiring senses, the working senses, and the false ego. And here it talks about the variations, that how the variations can happen. So 5 things are talked about here. One, first of all, is dravya. What is meant by dravya? The material objects, the physical objects we see around us. Second is swabhava, or the nature of the substance. The third thing is ashaya. It's given as culture, or we can also understand the nature of the mind or the antakarna, as we discussed in detail. That comes under ashaya. And fourth, we all understand karma, and fifth is kale, that is time. So now these 11 functions of the mind transforms into hundreds, thousands of millions due to these 5 things. And now we'll try to understand how. So first of all, we see, and another point that is mentioned, very, very important point, that all these transformations, everything that is happening, that is not by themselves. It's not they automatically combined by themselves, by their own strength, and this happens. But all happens under the supervision of the Supreme Lord, or the Paramatma is there who oversees all these activities. And he's the one who empowers all these elements for the transformations that happens. So first of all, let's try to see physical objects. So we can see a simple example. Let's say we have some object we like a lot. We like something to eat. Our tongue, let's say it likes paneer. Or some other example. We can take anything we like, gulab jamun for that matter. Now we see the physical object may be there and maybe to our liking. But let's say like recently that video was circulated about how paneer was being manufactured in a very wrong way, by the chemicals. In a synthetic way, this paneer was being manufactured. Now the same physical object will be there, the same thing will be there which will be to our liking, but then we won't be able to enjoy it. We won't like to taste that object if we realize where it has got manufactured from or how is it got manufactured. So this is just one example of a transformation, how it can happen. The same object, at one point if we realize that it's not made properly or it's made with so many chemicals, loaded with so many chemicals, we might not like to eat it. The second thing we talk about, nature. Nature of the substance, basically again how it is prepared. Something may be very nicely prepared, something may be very nice to eat, palatable to eat, and something may not be very tasty, may not be very nice to eat. Something may be sometimes some foods are maybe too spicy and salt is too much. We won't like to eat the same thing. So that comes under nature. The third one we discuss, ashaya, culture, or we also discussed previously antakarna. So this is basically the impressions. Based on past impressions, someone may be actually attracted to something, likes to eat a thing, maybe very, very much attracted or very much liking to eat a particular thing. But another person may not be attracted to the same thing because he has not tasted it before, he has not had the experience before. So he's not attracted to that same object. This is about ashaya. Fourth is karma. This is, or everyone is aware, we need to explain this also, that how even though everything may be correct, but then we may have some deficiency, we may have some issue, we may like to eat that thing also, but then due to our bodily disease, due to our some or the other reactions because of our karma, we may not be able to eat it. And fifth is the time factor. Time factor can also correspond to the youth and old age. When we are young, we may be able to eat some things very nicely. When we turn old, the same thing, even though we may be attracted to it, we may not be able to enjoy it. Another time factor, another explanation that can be given is, let's say we had a nice feast, our stomach is full, everything is, we don't have any more capacity left, and then someone brings the favorite thing we likes. Of course, some people are there who will still be able to take it, but in general, we won't be able to enjoy it. So that comes under time. So now we see the 11 functions of the mind because of these 5 aspects that are there, that is dravya, swabhava, ashaya, karma and kala. These 11 things gets transformed into hundreds, thousands and then millions. It keeps on getting transformed into more and more varieties. And this is what the explanation is given, that these unlimited varieties of these functions by the mind, by subdivisions into hundreds, millions and all. This is because of the infinite number of combinations or infinite number of permutations and combinations that are possible. Just like even if you take one object, even if you take the material objects, that was the first aspect, the dravya. We have infinite number of material objects. We have so many objects. We have sandalwood, we have musk, we have gold, silver, so many things are there. And based on the nature of a person, someone may like the smell of sandalwood, someone may like the smell of musk, or some other. I'm just making a combination. There can be so many such combinations. And because of it, that we see these combinations just multiplies more and more. And then the nature of the antakarna may vary from person to person. The karma may vary from person to person. Person may like to eat something, but because of some issues in the stomach, he may not be able to enjoy pakoda, puri, whatever. So this is karma. And then kal, as we already discussed, young age, old age. So this is how this works, that this unlimited variety, everything is that the 11 transformation, they get multiplied into hundreds, thousands, millions, that there's so many varieties. And another point that is the important aspect, that is that this is all happening under the supervision of the super soul or the Supreme Lord. The combination or the transformation does not happen by themselves, but because the Supreme Lord empowers everything, Supreme Lord is there within each and everything. That's why they get that property to exhibit their dharma, or they are able to exhibit that property and also transform into various aspects. That is the role of Supreme Lord here. So Prabhupada writes this thing in the purport. One should not think that all the interactions of the physical elements, gross and subtle, that cause the transformation of the mind and consciousness are working independently. They are under the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So very, very clearly he is stating that everything that is happening, the interactions that are happening, they are under the directions of the Supreme Person. He writes another line, he says, the body, nature and the physical elements are under the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They do not function automatically. Nature is neither independent nor automatic. And if you see, this is the theme which Prabhupada writes in many of the purports. This is like the basic of Krishna conscious philosophy. In many purports, many lectures, the same theme is repeated again and again, that nature does not work automatically. There is a supreme, if this is energy, there is an energetic behind it. Otherwise, nature cannot work automatically. And we are all aware about how Prabhupada spoke extensively against the Mayavad philosophy also. We see in so many places, so many purports, Prabhupada wrote many refutations against the philosophy. And now we have heard by so many speakers that even in some verses, some translations, there is no reference to the Mayavad philosophy as such, yet Prabhupada brings it in, smashes it somehow and refutes the philosophy. But we see when it comes to that Mayavad philosophy, there were scholars before also, like there were great acharyas. I was hearing there were acharyas like Madhvacharya, who had given so many big refutations. He used to actually refute the Sanskrit grammar itself. He used to take the verses of Sanskrit, the grammar, the sandhis, and through that very logically, very analytically, he used to refute the Mayavad philosophy. Very, very scholarly refutations, and all in Sanskrit he has given, which is not easy for us to understand unless we have knowledge of Sanskrit. Then we see another Acharya, Ramanujacharya is there, who has also written many refutations against this philosophy. And I was hearing in the Sandarbhas also, Jiva Goswami has used many of those refutations where Ramanuja has given against the Mayavad philosophy. So one thing, the point I was trying to make is that when it comes to Mayavad philosophy, there were many people, there were many acharyas who wrote against it, who spoke against it, and Prabhupada presented all of that in English. But this is one of the major things, or one of the big things that Prabhupada did. Apart from that, he openly and flatly refuted all the philosophies of a class of people we call the Maya Aprita Jnanas, or the scientists or the philosophers that are there. This is one of the things that Prabhupada did. This was one of the new things, or one of the things that was not done before. We were hearing one of the sessions of Bhakti Vaibhava, one of the teachers was telling us that how when the Britishers, they introduced the Western system of education, how they started training up all the youths, teaching them all the Western philosophies, this Darwin's theory, Big Bang theory, and so many things. And how when that systematic brainwashing happened, systematic brainwashing of the so-called the educated youth started happening, and they started disbelieving in their own culture. So there were many scholars that time, there were many scholars of the Sri Sampradaya, there were many scholars of the Madhva Sampradaya, but they voluntarily chose to remain quiet. Because they said, whatever is not in Sanskrit, we won't even touch it. This is a Mlecha language, we won't even write refutations against it. But this is where we see the glory of Prabhupada, who knew that what is going to happen, who understood the dire need of this, And that's why in all his presentations, so many books he keeps on repeating. He'll talk about these theories. First, he'll explain what is the Darwin's theory, what is this theory, and then he'll write against it. Especially this point about life comes from matter, or the scientist who speaks about that nature automatically there was an explosion. So many things came by that. He again and again refutes that by saying, no, life comes only from life. Life cannot be generated from matter. One of the very famous conversations of one of the disciples of Prabhupada, who was a scientist, where there was a where there was a scientist conference that was going on, and there was one scientist who was propounding that theory that I have got the combination of chemicals which can be used to make life. Means I understood the combination of how the human body is made or something like that. And then this scientist who was a disciple of Prabhupada, he asked him question. Okay, let's say you have understood all the chemicals. If I give you the chemicals, will you be able to prepare life? And that person said, no, that I cannot say. So Prabhupada used to again and again speak, refute on these points, flatly refuse these things that life cannot be generated from matter. Life can only be produced from life. And then he used to talk about the ultimate cause being the Supreme Lord. That it is from him who everything emanates, or he is the supreme cause of all causes. And that's what we see, that it's not easy. If you try to understand, it's not easy to refute something which everyone accepts as 100% true with no fallacy, no faults in it. These theories, even now people accept that they cannot be wrong. They are just completely, they are infallible. People think like that. But Prabhupada had that guts, Prabhupada had that courage to write these purports, speak directly against these philosophies. And that's what, because of the faith which Prabhupada had, because of the realizations which Prabhupada had, just by reading these books, just by reading these purports, many people get transformed. Many people read these books and their lives, even if they read one page, few parts of his books, their lives get transformed. They start accepting all this. Just like we remember one time we went to a PG, one of the devotees was telling. So he met a person who was completely an atheist, not interested in participating in our programs, not interested in attending anything. And the devotee somehow managed to give him a book, somehow convinced him at least to take this book. And then he left. He took some money and then he left. And then he was going to further to other rooms of the PG, and then the person called him back. That boy called him back that, where are you? I want to meet you. And now the devotee was perplexed, he was confused, because generally in PG, if someone is looking for us, that is for sending us out of the PG. So the devotee was thinking what to do, but yet he came, and then the boy also came to meet him. And that boy said that, oh, this is very amazing. I just read some part of this book, and it's actually very amazing. I want to participate in the programs that are there. This is the faith that Prabhupada had, that even if someone reads even some pages of my book, some line of my book, even a word of my book, his life will get transformed. And you see all the small books that Prabhupada has written, he speaks mainly about these aspects, about the Darwin's. He'll speak about Darwin's theory, Big Bang theory, about the scientific explanations, and then he'll refute them one by one. One of the book I was going through, that was this book written by Prabhupada. It's not actually a book written, it's a conversation. The life comes from life. It's a conversation between Prabhupada, the morning walk conversations, and Prabhupada and Dr. T.D. Singh, whom we all know is His Holiness Swarup Damodar Maharaj. So in this book also, I was reading, it was Prabhupada points out many hilarious things about the scientists. He speaks in a very humorous way and refutes all the scientist philosophies that are there. So in the foreword, very nice foreword was given. I'd just like to read it out. He says, for people who have come to accept every pronouncement of modern scientists as tested and proven truth, this book will be an eye-opener. Life Comes from Life is an impromptu but brilliant critique of some of the dominant policies, theories, and presuppositions of modern science and scientists by one of the greatest philosophers and scholars of the century, that is Srila Prabhupada. And in this, in different chapters, there were very, very nice headings that were given. So first chapter, the heading was something like Life on Other Planets, where there was a discussion going on. Maharaj is asking him that scientists say there is no life possible on other planets because the environment doesn't support, this doesn't support, and so many things they say. And Prabhupada gives the example of the frog philosophy, that how the frog in the well, when another frog comes from the Pacific Ocean, and he describes the ocean, that the ocean is so huge, so big, and this frog, he is not able to analyze, understand only, because he doesn't have that kind of impression, or he has not seen it ever. So he starts thinking, oh, okay, it may be 2 times bigger than this well, 3 times bigger than this well. but he can't think more than that because his brain doesn't support that capacity. And similarly, these scientists, they don't understand. They try to see everything in terms of relativity, that whatever experience they have, they say, okay, if there is God, he may be some little greater than us. They don't understand the extent of greatness of the Lord. So like this, very, very amazing. The names of the titles of those chapters were very, very nice. First was Life on Other Planets. The second chapter, the title was given like Darwinism, Extinct, and Nobel Prize for Asses. So here in this, he was very nicely, he was refuting the Darwin's philosophy. He was speaking that what he has spoken is all nonsense. And he said that maybe his forefathers may be monkeys, we do not know, but our forefathers are definitely not. And then someone was asking him, so what about the Nobel Prizes these people are getting? These scientists, they are getting more and more Nobel Prizes. So then Prabhupada quotes a verse from the Bhagavatam. He says, Shavid Vara Hoshtra Khare Samstuta Purusha Pashu. That these people who are getting all these Nobel Prizes and all the different people who are praising them for this, they are no better than asses. They are all comparable to asses. So this is how we see how bold Prabhupada was, how audacious his presentation was. He completely blasted the scientist in all his presentations. The third chapter, the title was Scientists as Thieves, where he talks about the moon landing. He talks that how these people, they take so much money, they are taking so many facilities, and they are doing so many researches, spending so much money. They are going to the moon, doing so many things, and what they get out of it? Nothing but bring some dust from there. So they're no better than thieves. They're just like thieves. And yeah, fourth chapter was, this title was specifically very, very nice. It says, The Progress of the Asses. So here Prabhupada writes, by so-called scientific improvements, the scientist has become an ass. Moreover, he is becoming a better and better ass and nothing more. Suppose that by working very hard like an ass, a person builds a skyscraper. He can engage in lifelong labor like that, but the point he's trying to make is ultimately he must die. Similarly, these scientists keep on working hard, that one day we'll reach something, one day we'll get to know everything. But they don't know how much they are going to live. They don't know their future, and they predict so many other things. So like this, understanding all this, reading all this, we can understand how much guts and how much bold Prabhupada was, that he completely spoke against this scientist, these popular people, and not just in his books, in his lectures also he used to speak openly against them. Even though that time, even now, they were widely accepted. That was the glories of Prabhupada. So coming back to the topic, here Jad Bharat and Rahugana are having a discussion. And Jad Bharat is also talking something similar. In the future verses also he'll speak about this. That you should not think you are the creator, or these transformations that are happening, they are happening on their own. Everything happens under the supervision of the Supreme Lord. Even in the Bhagavad Gita, we see a similar thing when Krishna introduces himself to Arjuna. So now Bhagavad Gita, as we all know, it begins from the first chapter, that is all about Arjuna's lamentation. His lamentation that we should not fight. And he's giving many reasons. He's speaking like a scholar, giving different reasons from different shastras why we should not fight on the battlefield. And then Krishna speaks about the Atma Gyan. He speaks about the knowledge of self-realization. And he speaks multiple topics, that how we are not this body, we are spirit, soul, and many other things to convince Arjuna to fight. But even after that, we see, it seems Arjuna became more convinced about taking karma sannyas, leaving the battlefield and going to forest. And further, Krishna speaks about the karma yoga aspect. He speaks about how we should not superficially become detached. Unless we understand the purpose, unless we understand the higher things, we should do our prescribed duties. So this was the beginning theme of the Bhagavad Gita. But now we see after this, if we see the ultimate purpose of speaking the Gita, why Krishna has arranged all that situation. Krishna arranges all that situation just to speak to Arjuna about the glories of Bhakti Yoga, or just to speak about Bhakti Yoga. In the first few chapters, Arjuna had some confusions. Krishna answers that. But now in the 7th chapter, we see Krishna starts speaking the actual knowledge. He speaks, Mai asakta mana partha yogam yunjan madashraya asamshayam samagram mam yatha gyashyasi tashrunu. So he speaks, now you hear from me what I want to speak. Now I'll tell you the actual thing. And then he speaks that how a person who is qualified, who can understand this knowledge. how a person who performs yoga in full consciousness of me, whose mind is completely attached to me, he is the one who can understand this knowledge in full without any doubt. This is where Krishna begins his actual teachings. So now the question is, how to know Krishna? How can we know Krishna? How can we perform bhakti? Unless we cannot understand Krishna, unless we do not understand who Krishna is, we cannot perform bhakti. And this is how Krishna introduces himself in the Bhagavad Gita in the 7th chapter from this verse. Bhumir apo analo vayu kham mano buddhi revacha ahankar itiyam me bhinna prakriti rashtada. This is the introduction of the Supreme Lord. He says all these cosmic manifestations, everything you see, earth, water, fire, air, ether, everything that exists is my energy. It comes from me. And this is what now in the teachings we will see in the further verses. This is how Jad Bharat also starts speaking here. He starts speaking about the Supreme Lord, that how he is the supreme proprietor. And this is a very, very important point, that whenever God has to be introduced to a living entity, whenever the Supreme Lord has to be told to a conditioned living entity, first the introduction has to be given about how he is the master. How is the Supreme Lord? How is the proprietor of everything? Even in the next sloka of the Bhagavad Gita, he says, Aparayam itastu anyam prakritim vidhi me param jiva bhuta mahabaho yayedam dharyate jagat. So first he speaks about his inferior energies, then he speaks about his superior energy, the jiva. But he says all these energies that are there, they come from me. Ultimately, they are all emanating from me. And this is how Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita introduces himself as the master of the material world. Another very interesting thing we see, that in the theme, if you see the theme of the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita and the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, it's very, very similar. So in the 7th chapter, Krishna talks about that who can know me or who can understand me. That was the first verse of the 7th chapter. That whose mind is attached to me, whose consciousness is fixed upon me. Even in the 9th chapter, Krishna tells Arjuna that who can understand me, the person who is completely non-envious. Who is non-envious of me, he can understand me. Then after that theme, he speaks about his energies. Like in the 7th chapter, he speaks all this Bhumir apano analo vayu, and all these energies, they are my part and parcel, they are my energies. Even in the 9th chapter, we see he speaks about his energies. That shloka is Maya tatamidam sarvam jagat avyakta murtina. Basically, I am the one, all this, the universe you see, it's because of me. I am there who is behind the universe. I am there in my unmanifested form, avyakta murtina, who is supporting all the universe. So first he speaks who can understand this knowledge, then he speaks about himself, about his energies. Again, then we see he speaks about what kind of people accept the form of the Lord, accept the supremacy of the Lord, and who don't. In the 7th chapter, we have this famous shloka, Chaturvida bhajante man, jana sukritona arjuna. That there are 4 kinds of people who worship me, who approach me, who have sukriti. And then the next verse goes on like, who don't approach me. Namam dushkrituno mula prapadyante naradama, maya prita jnana asurim bhava ashrita. That there are 4 kinds of people who approach me, and then 4 who do not approach me. Similar theme is there in the 9th chapter, where he speaks about Mahatmanas tu mam partham devim prakritim ashrita. That they are the Mahatmas. The Mahatmas, or the great personality, the learned people, are the ones who take shelter of my internal energy. They are the ones who are able to understand me, who take shelter of my internal energy. Devim prakritim ashrita. And then he also speaks about people who cannot understand me. Who are these? Avajananti mam mula manushim tanum ashritam. The mula is the foolish people. They are the ones who cannot understand me. This was the third thing. So first thing in both the chapters begins with understanding who can understand this knowledge. Second thing, the energies of Krishna. Third aspect, kinds of people who accept Krishna as it is and kind of people who don't. And finally, in both the chapters, he talks about the end time, that people who are not able to accept Krishna, they are the ones who deviate. And he speaks about the demigods worship, Yanti Deva Vrata Deva, and that what happens to these people who worship the demigods. What is the destination? And they are loaded with material desires. So they also worship the Lord, but in a wrong way, in an incorrect way, in a avidhi purvakam they worship. So this is the theme of 7th and 9th chapter. So now why I told this was, now someone may ask, why is this repeated again and again? Why this redundant knowledge is given again and again? Why the same things are repeated in both the chapters? So the point is, it's very, very important for a living entity, conditioned living entity, to understand about the greatness of Krishna. Understand how supreme the Lord is, how the Supreme Lord is the proprietor, the master of the entire world. And then we can discuss about the sweetness of Krishna. If you see, Krishna was there in the battlefield in front of Arjuna, he speaks all these things. But we also know Krishna's other forms, like we also know Krishna in different ways. We know Krishna is the Akhil Rasamrita Murti, Krishna is the Golok Ishwara, and as Mahaprabhu says, Krishna is Vrajeshat Bhagwan, Aradhya Bhagwan Vrajeshat Anaya, Taddhama Vrindavana. So, but all these things Krishna doesn't speak in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna doesn't talk about Nanda Maharaj, Krishna doesn't talk about Yashoda, Krishna doesn't talk about Vrindavan, all these things in the Bhagavad Gita. He speaks about his greatness. And that's what Prabhupada says in the purport. He says that it's the foundation. The 7th chapter purport, he says that Krishna is the proprietor of everything and one should understand how. One should utilize his intelligence, all his reasoning. He should tax his brain first to understand the greatness of the Supreme Lord. And once he understands that, then he can start understanding about the sweetness. In the 10th chapter, when Krishna explains about the Chatushloki Bhagavad Gita, he speaks this verse, Aham sarvasya prabhavo, matta sarvam pravartate, iti matva bhajante mam, buddha bhava samanvita. We cannot understand our devotional service unless we understand the greatness of Krishna. What is that greatness? Aham sarvasya prabhavo, that I am the supreme, I am the cause of all this spiritual and material world that we see. And then he says, iti matva bhajante mam. That first a person has to understand this, then worship me, iti matva bhajante mam, and then the intelligence will be given to understand everything else. Buddha bhava samanvita. So that's what here he says, that first, and that's what Prabhupada also writes emphatically in the purport, that first a person has to understand the greatness of Krishna, how great the Supreme Lord is, how he is the proprietor, and then we can talk about his pastimes, so then we can talk about his forms. Even in Bhagavatam we say similar thing. Bhagavatam Chatushloki Bhagavatam, the first shloka goes on like that. Aham evasam evagre nanya yat sad asat param. Basically he is giving the knowledge to Brahma. He says that I am the origin of everything you see. I am the one who existed before this creation. I am the one that you see now, and I am the one who will remain after this creation. So everywhere he introduces himself, he talks about who he is or what is his identity. He doesn't speak in the initial things, he doesn't speak about his pastimes, about his leelas. Because this is a very, very foundational thing that has to be understood. And how we can understand this thing by some simple example. Because to understand the higher aspects about Krishna's form, Krishna's pastimes, one requires some qualification. Like simple example of a company, like there is a very big company, there is a CEO. And there is an employee in that company. Now that employee is going in the market and by chance he happens to see the CEO. And with the CEO there is a secretary that is there. Now the secretary, let's say he has to introduce the CEO to that employee. What will he say? He will say, oh, he's the person, he's the master of this company, he's the proprietor of the company, he's the greatest person, he's the one who is giving your salary, he's the one who maintains everything, and many other firms are there in his establishment. That's how he'll start introducing himself. Krishna also in the Bhagavad Gita, he speaks all these things. Bhuktaram yagya tapasam sarva loko maheshwaram. Then this aham sarvasya prabhavo matta sarvam pravartate. Another verse which Prabhupada also quotes in this purport, maya dakshena prakriti suyate sa characharam hetunanena konteya jagat viparivartate. So basically the introduction is always given in the way to understand the person, who the identity of the person is. It will never happen that the laborer will or the office employee will go meet the CEO and the secretary will start introducing that, oh, this CEO, he's a very nice person, he has a very beautiful wife at his home, and then he has 2 daughters, 1 children, and one of the daughters, they are still unmarried. You can think. He won't introduce all that. He will speak about who this person or who the identity of the, because why won't he speak all that? Because this person or this employee is not qualified to know all that. Similarly, initially it's very, very important to understand the greatness of the Lord, or as Prabhupada says, the Mahanta of the Lord, and then we can understand the Madhurta of the Lord or the sweetness of the Lord. First we become qualified, or first with our capacity, with our logic, reasoning, we understand the greatness of the Lord, and then we start worshipping the Lord, iti matva bhajante mam, and then the pastimes or the form of the Lord, it said it's revealed when a person starts serving or surrenders to the Lord. And this is what in this purport also Prabhupada is telling about the scientist, That scientists or these people, they don't understand that the Supreme Lord is the Kshetragya. He is the Supreme Kshetragya. He is the one responsible for the combination of all the elements we see. All the material nature, material objects we see, time, karma, and all these things, how the combination happens, the Supreme Lord is responsible. Just like simple example we can take of H2 and O2, hydrogen and oxygen. Now if we see individually, they don't have any capacity. They don't have any capacity to extinguish some person's thirst. They don't have any capacity to extinguish a fire. They don't have any capacity. And individually we see they are both combustible. But when they both come together, they get that capacity. They get that capacity of quenching a person's thirst. They get the capacity of extinguishing a fire, all that they get. Now you go to some scientists to ask, how is that happening? They will speak, they will give the formula, they will speak so many things, but they won't be able to explain how this capacity is coming in water, how this capacity of extinguishing the thirst is coming in water. But that is what Krishna speaks in the Bhagavad Gita, Rasoham apsu kaunteya. That it is me who is giving that taste of water, it is me who is giving that power, or empowering that element to exhibit that taste so that it can extinguish the thirst, or so that it can extinguish the fire. This is what Lord says, that I am the one behind everything. You see any element, any property that it has, it is because of me. And I was hearing once Prabhupada was giving a similar class, he was talking about this verse, Rasoham apsu kaunteya, that how the Lord is the taste behind water. And the audience was seemingly not very convinced, not very satisfied with this. And then Prabhupada says very nicely, he says that Lord is the taste in wine also. The wine that you take, even that, the taste comes from the Supreme Lord. So that's what Prabhupada's thing is, that he will connect everything to the Supreme Lord, that how everything that is there has a connection with the Supreme Lord. And that's why even in Kunti Maharani prayers, which we were recently reading, Kunti Maharani also says the same thing. That it's very difficult to understand the Lord's pastimes. It's very bewildering when we see those, especially it talks about the Damodar pastime. It's very bewildering to understand all these pastimes. It's easier to understand, or we should begin with understanding Krishna's energies, but these pastimes I don't understand. And similarly, we see that that's why it said big basic things. First, we should try to understand the energies of the Lord, the different aspects of the creation, because that is comparatively, relatively easier to understand. But now this point also, it's not very easy. This point also, some people will say that when we read all these things about the aspects and given in the initial cantos, especially the Sankhya philosophy that is given by Kapila Dev. Now it's so complex, so many things are given in that, how the creation happened, how he talks about the different elements, the 25 elements that are there, how they are combining, all those things are happening. It's not easy to understand even that. So now how can we say this is easier to understand, one should begin with this? Rather, one can directly talk about the pastimes, they are quite easy to understand. But then this is what Prabhupada again and again writes in those purports also, that to understand Krishna, initially we have to apply all our intelligence, as I already mentioned, all our reasoning power to understand these aspects, understand about the proprietorship of the Lord, understand that all the Sankhya philosophy, all the items that are there, ultimately the Lord is the creator, Lord is the origin of them all. When a person understands all these things, when a person understands how God is great, how he is responsible for everything, and when a person surrenders with full faith to the Supreme Lord, then he gets the qualification, then he can discuss about these pastimes of the Supreme Lord. And very nicely this shloka is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, Madchitta Madgata Prana Bodhayantas Parasparam Kathayantascha Mam Nityam Tushyanti Cha Ramanti Cha. Two things that are given, Madchitta Madgata Prana. The persons whose mind are completely fixed on me, and Madgata Prana, the persons who have completely surrendered to me. They are the ones who can come together, they are the ones who can relish these pastimes, be satisfied, be blissful in hearing about these pastimes of the Supreme Lord and discuss them among themselves. And for that surrendering to the Supreme Lord with full faith, it becomes very, very necessary to understand the supreme position of the Lord, understand the proprietorship of the Lord. Prabhupada in this connection gives a story. So Prabhupada also talks about this story. He talks about a person in a village. He talks about this person in a village who had this burning desire to serve the greatest person. He wanted to find out who is the greatest person in this world and I want to serve him. So he went to the village chief, he started serving him. But after some time, he noticed that the governor came from the district and he was even greater than this village chief. So now this person, he requested the governor that I want to serve you because I want to serve the greatest person. And then he started serving the governor. After some time, he noticed that this governor is also paying tax to the king. His governor is also subservient to the king. So then he went somehow, he managed to go to the king and he requested him that please accept me in your service. I want to serve since you are the greatest in this kingdom. And he was very happy. He was very satisfied. But one day he saw the king going in the woods, going in the forest and serving an ascetic, serving a monk. And that time he said, oh, it's better than that I should serve this monk because even this king is subservient or king is also serving this monk. And finally, when he goes to that ascetic, finally he goes to the saint and says that I want to serve you because you are the greatest. Then the saint says, no, I am just a humble servant of the Supreme Lord. And actually the greatest person in this world is the Supreme Lord, Lord Krishna. So if you want to serve the greatest, you should serve the Supreme Lord. And finally this person reached the desired goal of serving the greatest person, that is the Supreme Lord. So this is how Prabhupada explains that first it's very, very important to understand who is the Supreme Lord, worship him with full faith and surrender, and then we can understand, then we can discuss his pastimes, and then we can understand the pastimes. And that's what Prabhupada says, that's why it's very, very important to engage our consciousness in Krishna's service, engage all our senses in serving the Supreme Lord. As he says, Rishikena, Rishikesha, Sevanam Bhaktir Uchyate. When we understand the Lord's greatness, then we engage all our senses in his service, and then we can get purified, and then we can understand the higher aspects like that. So with this, I would like to pause here. Hare Krishna. I skipped that part.
Anyone has any question?
We can continue, Prabhuji. I have some more to. Okay. So here we were discussing how we can engage all our senses in Krishna's service. Rishikesha, Rishikena, Sevanam Bhaktir Uchyate. And we always hear about the example of Amrish Maharaj. We always hear this example of Amrish Maharaj, that how he engaged all his senses in the Lord's service. And there was very amazing example of very amazing prayers of King Kulashekara also, which were very similar to these verses of Amrish Maharaj. How he also engaged all his senses in the Supreme Lord's service. So I just wanted to recite these prayers. Can we display that on the screen? So very nice prayers by this follower, by this Alvar, great Alvar, King Kulashekara, who was very great devotee of the Lord, and very similar to the lines of Amrish Maharaj prayers. So I'll just recite, you can repeat after me. Jive kirtaya keshavam muraripum cheto bhaja sridharam.
Jive kirtaya keshavam muraripum cheto bhaja sridharam.
Pani dvanda samarcha chuta katha Shrotra tum shrinu.
Pani dvanda samarchaya chuta katha Shrotra tum shrinu.
Krishnam lokaya lochana dvaya harer Gacchangari yugmalayam.
Krishnam lokaya lochana dvaya harer Gacchangari yugmalayam.
Jigra grana mukunda pada tulasim Murdham namadokshajam.
Jigra grana mukunda pada tulasim Murdham namadokshajam.
So here we see how King Kulashekara, he praises the Supreme Lord, and he talks about engaging all his senses in the serving of the Lord. How the tongue should be engaged in praising the glories of the Lord, mind should be engaged in worshipping the Supreme Lord, hand, ears, and everything should be engaged in worshipping the Supreme Lord. Very similar to the prayers which Amrish Maharaj also makes about engaging all the senses in the service of the Supreme Lord. And as we have already discussed, this is the process when we surrender to the Supreme Lord, engage all our senses in the service of the Supreme Lord. Then we get purified, then we get the qualification of understanding the different aspects of the pastimes of the Supreme Lord. Hare Krishna.
बस हो गया.
Questions? Anyone else?
The 11 things we that creates further and those transformations. In that respect, you mentioned the Dravya Swabhava Ashya. So, what is the connection between those 11 things and these 5?
Because of these five objects that are there, because of those 11 things transform. Those 11 are basically the senses, the sense objects that are there, that are those 11 functions that was given in the previous shloka. The ego that is there and all the 10 sense objects that are there. And the transformation happens because of these 5 things. As I explained in the initial time, no? Antakarna, how because of the impressions, how because of the objects that are there, how because of the time, because of the karma. If someone is going through a bad time, he might not be able to enjoy the same object, sense object. So how through them millions of transformations happen. That was the thing.
This one question I got to was false ego is above the intelligence according to the hierarchy that is there. False ego is the subtlest. So when we were describing, so it was senses, working senses and knowledge acquiring senses, then false ego, then mind. How to understand this?
It means in that shloka Indriyani Parara I explained.
In that anyways, false ego doesn't come. False ego is not described in that. But in this Bhagavatam shloka itself, so they're talking about 5 senses, 5, and then false ego, and then mind.
This not aware. ठीक है. ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय. जगत गुरु श्रील प्रभुपाद की
जय.